everyone. The Inside Influence team and I are taking an 8-week sabbatical this winter, or summer if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, to generally reset, recalibrate, and refill our creative tanks. Now, for many of us, myself included, that means traveling across the world to see family members where it has been far too long between hugs. To keep you fueled while we're gone, fear not, we have traveled back through the archives, back through time, and pulled out 4 of our favorite Inside Influence episodes of all time. Now, I can also, hand on heart, say that each of these 4 episodes has, in some way, radically changed how I now show up, lead, and influence. If you're new to the Inside Influence crew, enjoy the ride. If you are a long-time listener, these are definitely conversations that are worth listening to for a second time. Stay safe, and we will see you back with our brand new season in August.
Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure.
I will live every day as if there were a microphone tucked under my tongue.
It's great to get in the game, but don't get in the game until you understand the rules till you're an insider.
Your life changes when you begin having a different conversation in your head.
What we need to do in radically deep problems is propose radically visionary solutions.
Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Greetings everyone, my name is Julie Masters and welcome to another episode of Inside Influence, in which I delve into the minds of some of the world's most fascinating influencers or experts in influence to get to the bottom of what it really takes to own your voice and then amplify it to drive an industry, a conversation, a movement, or a nation. Now I want to kick off today by talking a little bit about the word devotion. Songs are written about it, poetry includes it, plays are all about it, films are made about it. We use it in association with our family, our children, our partners. But colleagues and employees? Yeah, not so much. Now, sure, we all want the best for the people we work with, but how many leaders can truly say that they are devoted to the success of their people? How many of us have worked for leaders where we could truly say that we felt like they were devoted to our success? And as leaders, how frequently do we feel that devotion? Do we feel that pull? Or are we distracted by every fire that we feel like we need to put out? Now, success is the key word here, because helping somebody else become the best person that they can be on the pitch, off the pitch, so they thrive under your stewardship and for long after, is one of the most vital forms of influence that I think that there is. And I also feel like we all want that. That's why we show up. In our heart of hearts, we have that intention for every single interaction. The question is, what derails us and how do we get it back on track? Now, my guest today, she is striving for more of us to do just that. Frei is an American academic and author. She is the UPS Foundation Professor of Service Management and Senior Associate Dean for Executive Education at Harvard Business School. I'm so glad I got that right. She is also the author of the recently released, in fact, I think just released book, Unleashed, The Unapologetic Leader's Guide to Empowering Everyone Around You. On top of that, and actually the thing that made her stand out to me the most when we were doing our research and talking in the lead up to this interview, is that she also took that leap from academia into enterprise and found herself in Silicon Valley as the very first senior vice president for leadership and strategy at Uber. Now, that would be interesting enough, but that happened at a time where Uber was under fire from pretty much every corner of the planet. I don't know if you remember that, but it was a time when Uber was actually a dirty word for drivers, for customers within industry, and she was brought in with that exact intention in mind. Her job description was to restore trust at a time when it was an all-time catastrophic low. Now, her first decision that she made in that role should tell you a lot about who she is, about her strength, her integrity, and her intention. She committed to wear an Uber t-shirt every day, and I'm talking every day, weekends included, until the people working alongside her were as proud to wear it as she was. Now that, again, tells you a lot about where she comes at this topic from, but more on it later. What brought her first into my world was actually her TED Talk, How to Build and Rebuild Trust, where her insightful and more than anything else practical views on building trust in a world where it is in short supply actually became the first time that I had viewed trust as something tangible, something that we can all build, something that has a process that can be followed quickly and predictably. I think up until that point, trust for me was one of those ethereal things up in the ceiling that you only really knew about it once it had gone. In this interview, we cover that amongst many other things. But firstly, we cover unapologetic leadership, what it is, what it looks like, and why it has nothing to do with the refusing to take responsibility, and in fact, quite the opposite. Devotion. Yep, that word again. If it makes you feel uncomfortable, then just stick with it. What does it take to be deeply devoted to the wild success of another human being? More success than they could possibly ever achieve on their own. And then, if we can do it once, which we can, how do we take that impact and harness it to create what Francis calls a cascade effect, where it goes on to transform entire teams, organizations, and possibly an entire nation? How you set and hold high standards without disconnecting from the person you're trying to support. Now, this is one I have definitely struggled with over the years. How do you play bad cop and still make sure someone feels like you have their back? The taking and giving of radical responsibility. Love that term. This one I haven't actually stopped thinking about since the interview. It's become almost a filter through which I'm running decisions at the moment, and it's been a total game changer. We also talk about the trust triangle, what the 3 points of the triangle are and how to achieve them and maintain them. This is the practical part of trust that I talked about. And how to look square on and without flinching at what Francis calls the devastating data. That data is the information that informs you as to where you currently sit in the eyes of your team, client base, or community. And then how to use that information if it's not positive, rather than a brick to beat yourself with, but as a benchmark so that you know exactly when to celebrate. Now, leadership is hard at the best of times. For anybody who has attempted it or does it on a daily basis. However, in the middle of a pandemic, on the edge of a recession, when you're miles away from those you are trying to serve and support, I'm not actually sure it gets much harder. And if I took anything from this conversation, it's the calm and wholehearted way in which Francis approaches the tough stuff, the messy stuff, the hard stuff, the devastating data. And if nothing else, I hope that carries with you for the rest of your day. In the meantime, enjoy my conversation with a force in the world of trust and devotion, Francis Frei. Welcome to the podcast, Francis Frei. So lovely to have you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
Before we pressed record here, we both gave each other permission just to be a little bit... What was the word you used?
Not as buttoned up.
Not as buttoned up. I think this is a not as buttoned up time. So yes. Let's just do that. Well, I'm gonna kick off with a question that I usually kick the podcast off with at the moment. I go through phases of what I'm interested in. And at the moment, it's ideas that are having the most influence on the people that I'm talking to, because I find that interesting people just gravitate naturally towards interesting ideas. So what's an idea that's having an impact on you at the moment, or an influential idea you've come across recently?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I just got to read an early draft of a book called The Remote Work Revolution by Sadal Neely, and that remote work is now a revolution is a super interesting idea, that this is not a temporary time that we're in. And it's not simply taking what we used to do and simply moving it remote. We're going to have to rethink, and we get to rethink all aspects of work, and that's pretty darn exciting.
I'm seeing that everywhere now. I think it was a question in the beginning, will we just slot back in, or will we, will this create a whole new kind of environment for everybody? And everybody that I'm talking to is saying, no, this is the previous way is done now. Like it's
I think
at
it's
the
done.
highest levels.
I think it's done. Yeah.
So where are we going to end up? Any ideas?
Oh, I'm many things, but a futurist is not one of them.
Pretty much where we are now, crouching in rooms. I'm sure they'll come up with something better.
No, I think we're going to listen. I think everybody is going to figure out how to do this. And we're going to get to the absurdity of how we used to do things. Like there's people that would commute 2 hours or 3 hours in. I just don't think that's going to happen very much anymore. And the way in which we're going to look for houses is going to be different because we don't need much space, private space, but we need some private space. So instead of this being a closet, this is going to be the studio.
Well, I want to jump into your work because I'm just such a huge fan of the work that you do. The book that you've released recently is called Unleashed: The Unapologetic Leader's Guide to Empowering Everyone Around You. And I got stuck on the word unapologetic out of that. I got stuck on many words, but the first one, talk to me about unapologetic leadership. What does that look like?
Yeah, so if you take our definition of leadership, which is that leadership is not about the leader, it's about others, and it's about empowering others, that will be an unusual twist. And we don't want you to ask for permission. We don't want you to do it sheepishly. We want you to do it with pride. And so it's not unapologetic about bad things. It's unapologetic about doing things differently in service of others.
But it's an energy, isn't it? To be unapologetic. It's not, like you said, it's not going out there and just doing anything you like without the accountability of apology. It's an energy to which you do things.
Yeah, and it's there's a few books coming out this fall with the word unapologetic in it, and I've long loved the word. There has been, I particularly look at women and people of color, and there's just been too much hesitation. And if we could remove that hesitation, the world would be a better place.
Just go in there and start moving.
Just start moving.
Start moving. One of the concepts from the book, which again is one of those ones that I read, and it's simple but it's so hard, is you start by setting one other person up for success. And I read that and I was like, of course, set someone else for success. And for a control freak like me, that's just sounds like something I want to do, but then really in my heart of hearts. So you learned a lot of counterintuitive things about how to do that. Can you walk through some of those things that you found?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. So and the way it's one person at a time. And if you can do one person at a time, then what naturally follows is how to do it for teams. But when we are going to set one person up for success, and we mean wild success, like more success than they could achieve on their own. And this all goes back to the foundation of Toni Morrison's awesome quote, which is the modified version of it is once you get power that you richly deserve, the first thing you should do is empower someone else. And so if we're going to empower one person at a time and help them achieve their best, we found that there are two levers that our instincts are that you can only do one at a time, but real unleashing of other people happens when you do them both simultaneously. And that is setting high standards for people, which isn't a surprise. People thrive in the presence of high standards. And it's revealing your deep devotion to another person's success. And that one is a little bit harder for people to do. And when we do it, we insidiously lower the standards, and that doesn't help anyone. So it's how do you achieve both at the same time? So I think it is counterintuitive at first, but we try to put in enough resonant examples so that once you see the world this way, you can't unsee it.
Can you give me one of those examples?
Sure. So a lot of people, particularly when they haven't had a good night's sleep, they might communicate their very high standards for other people. And they will be perceived as a little bit severe because they're like, it's high standards or else I won't like you as much, or else I won't, give you as many perks as versus high standards and deeply devoted to your success so that you can achieve even higher standards. And so a way that happens is that someone who's in this, and we call it the quadrant of severity, high standards and low devotion. If you have like really deep curious inquiry about another person, that's what it takes to reveal that you're deeply devoted to them. Like asking them and really trying to uncover, like, how would you like your CV to look different in 3 months? What are the developmental opportunities that I can do? Are there non-value added things that you're doing? Can I remove those from your plate? And what like enriching thing can I put back on it? So it's setting high standards. It's not lowering the bar, but it's doing it in a way that's curated for you. And so that's one example.
You also said, I mean, you alluded there that once you can do it for one, it's almost like beta testing. Like once you can do it for one, you can do it for a team. You can do it for an entire organization. So you can scale that up from there. Are there any keys to scaling it?
Yeah, there sure are, because you can do it one at a time, and that's with high standards, deep devotion. When you're going to do it with a team, particularly a team that has any members that are different than you, then you have to learn how to be super inclusive of those differences. And so there we talk a lot about how does inclusion manifest? And we all know that diverse teams of difference, outperform homogeneous teams. That's what all of the research says. Having said that, I have seen diverse teams underperform homogeneous teams. So diversity alone is not sufficient. But when we are inclusive of the diversity, that's when we get to outperform. So when you're doing this at the set of teams, you really have to underline the word inclusion and learn how can I genuinely be inclusive. And when you get to the highest level of inclusion, that's when people feel like they are of this place, like they genuinely belong.
You also said you believe, I think I read it in an interview somewhere, that you believe it can be done for a nation.
Well, you're in Australia. I guess you'd have to have pretty strong binoculars, but you don't have to look very far. I think New Zealand is a pretty good example of it.
Isn't it just? Is it like the leadership in that nation is a case study just waiting to happen?
And here's the thing so the first chapter of the book is it's not about you. It's like leadership is really about the performance of other people. And I did this experiment where I just, from my observation, lined up all of the nation's leaders from top to bottom in those that I thought it's all about them, and those I thought it's all about others. And then I also looked at their performance on COVID. Startlingly strong correlation. And I think you have one of the most magnificent leaders, not just of our time, but of all time in New Zealand. And it's clearly she may appear flustered, but it's easier to not appear flustered when it's not about you, because doesn't appear to me to be concerned about her performance. She doesn't appear to me to be concerned about, popularity contests. She appears to me to be deeply invested in setting her country and all of the people in her country up for success and being an awesome world citizen.
And I think that part of that, one of the things I've really noticed, is when you are in service of others truly, and I love that word, deep devotion, the bar for your own perfection can come down.
Oh, it's such a gift. It's such a gift.
Yeah,
to women in particular. She's
doing these Facebook Lives from her home. She's in it, and that's got nothing to do with party politic tricks, I don't believe. It's a moment where you go, you know what, whatever it takes to get this job done. I don't care how perfect I look. I don't care if it's a little bit messy around the edges when it has to be, because I'm not here for that purpose. I'm here for the service of everybody else.
I'm not, right. I don't care if I'm crouched around a microphone in a closet.
Now, let's go back to power for a second. I mean, again, it's something you alluded to, that a part of unleashing everybody around you and unleashing the potential that exists is making our power contagious. And I think for a lot of leaders, and I was actually just talking to one yesterday, a lot of leaders, that's really hard because they feel like they're almost the North Star, right? It's the North Star challenge where everything's going well while they're in the room or while they're in the building, and everybody can kind of use them to navigate. But when they leave the building, accountability goes with them, permission to use power goes with them. What's the antidote to that North Star challenge?
and I'll give a little context before I answer, which is that so the definition of leadership we use is leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and having it last into your absence. So this is a key to leadership, and I understand why people have not focused on it, because if the team is great in my presence and it's bad in my absence, particularly people that are data driven, they're like, well, I'm statistically significant. Like, I matter.
And that
when
can
I'm
feel
there,
good,
it's good.
right?
When it's, and it can feel good. It's so ego nourishing. You don't have to back the lens out all that much to realize, oh my goodness, but it's such a wasted, like, lack of progress on the sake of the company or on the sake of humanity. So figuring out how, first, that the ambition is for people to thrive in your absence, and then preparing them for that in our presence. Now, one of the amazing things that's, the travesty of this global pandemic is that we're all in one another's absence a lot. The amazing thing is the experimentation that's going on for people figuring out how to set one another up for success. And I think this is also why I was drawn to Sadal's remote work revolution, that because, you can't really see as much on Zoom as you can on in person. And so the advice I often give to people is, imagine if you were blind, so you're not able to pick up any visible cues. Now, how would you know how people are doing? And I think that's not a bad metaphor for when we're remotely, because we can't really read the room on Zoom.
And I think as a leader, especially if you're sat either in the same room or in the vicinity of your team, you're often walking past, right? Like you're walking past, or you glance up, you can see, if you're in any way kind of connected in with your team, you can often feel, okay, there's a bit of there's something going on in the corner of that room. I don't know what it is, but I think I'd better go. But Zoom removes all of that. And so that metaphor of being blind is completely accurate.
And not only does did it remove it, but it's also, and I don't know what it's like for you, but they're not stationary. So I can't, like at HBS, we have everyone sit in the same seat, so we really get to know them. We remember what they say. I can't get people to show up in the same quadrant on Zoom, no matter how hard I try. Like, you're here and then you're over there. Like, you keep going around the Brady Bunch circle. So we really have to come up with new ways of doing it. And I find using our words is the best way to do it.
It always amazes me with this podcast that the insights and the mastery that comes out from the guests often so easily correlates with parenting advice, which is, we know this stuff when we're trying to raise a small human. Like, we know things like use your words, asking questions, getting down to one stuff, the basics of connection, influence, and persuasion, and doing it with deep devotion and compassion. We know it. But once we start applying it in the grown-up world, for some reason the wheels fall off. It's really interesting. Talk to me about radical responsibility. So both the taking of radical responsibility, again, it's like that Jocko Willink book, Extreme Ownership, and also the giving of radical responsibility, the expectation that I expect you to take radical responsibility for your role and your place in this team.
So I'll do the first one first, which is, a lot of environments will say, well, look, we're going to hire a lot of people and it's going to be sink or swim. And so, whether or not you make it, it's up to you. And I really don't like those kinds of environments for a bunch of reasons. But one is they are typically very unfair. And that is, we give, the people that make it, the great swimmers in our sink or swim metaphor, they received a lot of help. They didn't really understand it as help, and the givers didn't see it. But we provide life preservers and float devices to people that are like us without even knowing it. And people that are different than us, it really is sink or swim. So just from a fairness perspective, I don't like it. I also just don't like it as an abdication of leadership. Imagine if you took radical responsibility for the success of others. Mm-hmm. And it's not lowering the bar. What would that look like? And one of the examples that really hit this home for me, so HBS has ridiculously low promotion rates. And it's been very, it would say them in like other top schools and be like, but say it with a bit of pride. And we're like, oh, it's always been like this. And to me, that's like, wow, I'm not proud of an unimproving operating system. We've gotten no better at developing people in 50 years. That doesn't make sense. And then I say, but go look at Caltech. And Caltech is as excellent as any other university on the planet. And their promotion rates are like 70%. And Harvard's promotion rate might be like 10%. And Harvard, and Harvard and MIT and Stanford, like all really low, and Caltech really high, which shows it's possible if you take radical responsibility for the success of other people. And then I'm like, so are we choosing not to? And is that the right way to set the conditions for people to thrive? I find it super, super provocative.
And just as a question, what would radical responsibility look like here?
Yeah.
For this issue, for this topic, for this human being, for this team, for myself, I just love it as a question.
Yeah, I do too.
And to keep asking it on a daily basis.
Yeah. So for the giving part, I think that is, giving radical responsibility. I'm a little less inclined for that because I don't want it to feel like it's severity. I want it to feel like it's high standards and deep devotion. So as long as I want to set you up for success and I want you to fly, but I don't want it to feel like it's without a net. If there are any pebbles in the way, I want you to know that you can get help with them. So I really feel it for the taking of radical responsibility for others. Of the giving radical responsibility, I just want to make sure the radical is soft enough in that case, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And so you might not know, but is there better languaging around that in terms of how we communicate what we want to give to another individual, in terms of, again, making our power contagious?
Yeah, so I think that what I want other people to do is to achieve the best version of themselves and set the conditions for others. So I kind of want it to cascade forward as opposed to play back.
Walk me through that.
Sure. So if I set someone else up for success and I take radical responsibility for their success, what I want them to do in turn is take radical responsibility for the success of the people on their team.
Got it.
And I want them, and so if each one of us is in service of another group, as opposed to having a reciprocal relationship with one another, I think that's actually the key.
I love that. I want to move into trust now, because a lot of this starts and ends with trust, and a lot of your work starts and ends with trust. You had said, that trust is the key to unprecedented human progress. I'm guessing you can take human out of there and put organizational, team, individual. Why is that? Why is it the foundation?
Yeah. Country, nation, international. Because it's not the foundation of all interaction. We have tons of interaction with which no progress is made. But if we're going to make progress and forward progress, that doesn't have to be relitigated, right? So it's not fits and starts, but we're making forward progress in a really timely manner. Then what the foundation of trust allows us to do is it's an accelerant. And so it's easiest for me to talk about with the absence of it. So if I don't trust you, I may say yes now, but I'm going to go check with other people and I'm going to come back. And then I'm going to say, you know what? I didn't really mean yes. I kind of meant maybe. And why don't you do this and this? And I meant yes, but you know what? Let's delay it a little longer. And so what trust does is it allows us to remove all of those things and genuinely make progress, like to genuinely progress forward. And without it, the word that comes to my mind is that we're just constantly relitigating and we're constantly compromising. And so in that way, I do feel like it's the foundation of all great progress.
I think, there's been a lot of talk about trust, especially over the past year or so. And you look at global politics, you look at transparency within organizations. Here we had, a Royal Commission. And, some would say that trust is at a unprecedented low. And I think it gets thrown around a lot as a word, and it can sometimes feel very ethereal to me. And you just can't put your finger on it. It's nothing practical. It's hard to weave it through my daily decisions or look for it in other people. And what I love about what you did is you've just done this beautiful job of bottom lining it and getting absolutely practical about what are the components of trust and how can they be worked on. Can you walk through how you define trust in those components?
Sure. And I believe trust I believe every one of us, once we get the benefit of the lens that we're about to talk about, every one of us can build more trust tomorrow than we have today. It's that quick. And because we found out, and the big breakthrough was that trust has 3 component parts. So we call it a trust triangle. If it had 4 component parts, we'd call it a trust quadrangle. But it has, and we look forward to finding the 4th, but with testing this in over 100,000 people in all locations, it's still only been 3. And that is, you are more likely to trust me if you sense it's the real me speaking to you. I can lose your trust if I say something that you sense I don't believe. Maybe my boss said, here, go tell the team this, and I don't believe, but I feel like I'm a good team player, so I go say it anyway. And that's authenticity. And authenticity is a word that a lot of people have different definitions. Ours is super clear. Do you believe it's the real me speaking to you? If yes, it's a component of trust. It won't get us all the way there, but its absence takes away trust. Do you believe I have a rigorous plan? Do you have evidence that I have a rigorous plan? It's the real me, but would you let me drive? Does it? All right, it's the real me, and it's a solid plan. Am I sufficiently in it for you, or does it feel like it's all about me? And that's empathy. And so when all 3 of those are working, we have trust. And any time trust breaks down, individual to individual, organization to constituent, nations, we can always trace it back to authenticity, logic, or empathy. And the beautiful thing is we have very specific guidance about how to overcome those. The important thing is the prescriptions are super different for each of the 3. So it can't be like, oh, the last time trust broke down, I tried this. You have to be more specific than that. The last time there was an empathy wobble, and we call the challenges wobbles because we want to remove the notion that there's liquid cement on it. We can actually overcome it. And so what's ever getting in the way, we take a great deal of humility, but super optimistic, pragmatic prescriptions. We feel like there's secret memos on how to overcome it.
I love that. And when you said authenticity, rigor in your logic and empathy. And the reason I love rigor in your logic in the middle there is because I feel like I have a lot of conversations about authenticity. And I feel like sometimes the term authentic or authenticity can sometimes be used as a catch-all for not showing up as your best self. For, I was just being authentic. I was authentically, falling apart in that moment. That's fine, but when it comes to leadership, I would rather you be intentional. Bring your authentic self, but be intentional in how you're showing up. And that's the rigor, right? That's the rigor of your logic.
Well, rigor and empathy. Let's say that I'm a largely authentic person, but when I bring that last 90, 100% of authenticity, it's too much for people to bear. I'm sacrificing empathy around the edges. So, you might have to trim your authenticity a little bit when you're in it for others. So I think it's not that I want to be inauthentic. I can't pretend I'm not, but it's okay to leave some of that authenticity at home, just a little bit.
And that's an amazing counter, the empathy part. I hadn't thought about that. But you also have to think about how your complete authenticity in that moment is going to make other people feel around you, and how it's going to impact their state and their ability to go forward and move forward in a strong and resourced way.
That's exactly right.
I want to just put this into a real life context at the moment. So you were hired to turn around Uber's culture. So you were Uber's first SVP of leadership and strategy. which again, to have been a fly on the wall during that time. But firstly, what took a professor to an organization that, in your own words, was metaphorically and literally on fire from a trust standpoint?
Yeah, so a bunch of, happenstance, but the reason I ultimately decided to go was that it was, it was challenged. I think everyone around the world knew it was challenged. And I thought, if we can fix it here, we give license and perhaps obligation to anyone who has less significant challenges. And so I like learning at the extremes. I also like fixing things at the extremes so that it provides a roadmap and optimism for everyone who's not at the extreme. And Uber, in my mind, was in June of 2017, it really could have gone either way. And many of its problems were cultural. And 9 months later, it didn't have any of those problems anymore.
Didn't you make a public commitment to wearing an Uber t-shirt every single day until every employee was prepared to wear an Uber t-shirt?
Yeah, and the context of that was important, which is that, in the beginning, Uber was like a super proud, like people were really proud to be there. When I got there in June of 2017, employees wouldn't even admit to Uber drivers that they worked at the company. They went to less social gatherings because the topic was always Uber, and they had a shame at working there. So this once proud, and I thought like awesome organization, and I thought the individuals were awesome. Like if you look at the changes that were made, we separated from like 20 people in June of 2017 of, I don't know, between 10 and 15,000. So the vast majority of the people were awesome. And I'm not saying the people that were separated were awesome, but they just needed to be separated with. So these were awesome people. This was creating, I thought, an amazing service, and they weren't proud. And I was super proud. I left Harvard to go there. Like I was super proud to be there. And I wanted that pride to be contagious. And I wanted the whole world to know I was there because I wanted them to give me feedback. So I wore an Uber shirt every day for 9 months. And by the time I left working there full time, and then I stayed on as an advisor, Uber shirts were prominent again, and they're prominent again now. And that sounds like a small test. It's actually a really good test, particularly in Silicon Valley with casual dress.
Now, one of the issues, actually, no, I'm going to go somewhere different. One of the hardest things to do, I think, when you're in a position where you know things are wrong, something's not right, is to face the dragon of whatever it is. And you call that collecting the devastating data. When you were at Uber, what did you identify early on in collecting that kind of devastating data?
So I think that it was pretty well documented, the really rocky relationships with regulators. While we had been devoted to riders since the inception, it often felt like a fixed pie between riders, and drivers weren't benefiting. And then riders got really upset with us about how we were treating drivers. And so there was all like really super ample evidence of how people felt about the brand. Internally, there were some demographic tendencies about who was thriving. And then externally with the relationships, the sentiment just wasn't there. And honestly, there were achievement, like ridership was going down, like the achievement was. So I'd say every metric was going in the wrong direction. And I very much like knowing, taking the snapshot of the before, because I really want to know, when do we get to celebrate? And so tell me, so if there's like gaps between one group and another, when the gaps are closed, we get to celebrate. If the slope used to be positive and now it's negative, when it's positive again, we get to celebrate. So we took a very clear-eyed snapshot of, and we knew we were done when everything was going in the right direction.
And you said, when you've got that devastating data, don't release it straight away. Like,
Yeah,
don't just hand it out.
Yeah. No. Because here's why that, and I would see this on campuses. Like I'll tell you the parts that were most heartbreaking for me. When there was a few years ago when presidents of all universities were super concerned about sexual harassment on campus, as they should be, and as they hadn't been, and so they did a big study. And the data came in at like 11:50 at night, and they shared the data at like 11:55. And I said to myself, oh no, we're about to waste 2 years. Because if you just send out the devastating data, people are going to, is it true? Is it not true? How did you ask this question? You should also have asked this question. Go out and get this data. I mean, an organization usually obsesses over the data for about 2 years. But instead of if you received it on, wait a month, and in that month work furiously to pilot super optimistic ways forward. And by optimistic, by like that it's not condemning anyone. It's just looking for ways to overcome it, and then release the data and the successful pilot, and then let the community come up with even better ways to improve. So instead, over those 2 years, people are pointing fingers and they're arguing and they're not really digesting. It's a waste of 2 years. But if you waited a month or however long it took for you to do a pilot and release that and the data, you just removed that unnecessary wallowing in the data, and instead have all of that beautiful share of mind aimed at finding better and better ways of overcoming the challenges that are so clearly apparent from the data.
But that applies universally, doesn't it? The most influential thing
Yes.
to do is not to walk into the room, walk into the arena with the problem and share the problem far and wide. The idea is to go in with ideas and solutions that you at least have an idea might work, have some faith will work.
And here's the thing, they don't have to be the ultimate ones, but you have to give us optimism with it. And because if you just set the organization free, and in today with the move towards transparency, like everyone wants more and more transparency, me too, but I would definitely hold data for a month if I could pilot optimistic ways forward, because I know what happens to institutions. It takes them about 2 years to process devastating data. And I would much rather, I've learned from, pattern matching, I'd much rather save that pain and, frankly, the lack of progress. And so I do think it's a good lesson on transparency.
I want to just move back into the trust triangle for a second, and also tie in Uber. You had said that hyper growth can create wobbly logic, and rigor of logic being one of the parts of that triangle, and that was one of the issues at Uber, that often our logic is really sound, but our ability to communicate the logic, and I see that a lot, with hyper smart people, crazy smart people, who should be one of the most trusted individuals or trusted teams in their marketplace, just not making it there because their logic is strong, but their ability to communicate the logic is not as great.
Yeah, and that comes across the same way as people who don't have great logic. So if you lose us in translation, we can't tell, oh, it's a communication problem. It may well be a substance problem. So it's super high stakes. The communication problem is pretty, once you see it, it's quite easy and quite straightforward to overcome. And it is, you probably have the same experience when you watch people that they get it, but you're listening and you're like, oh my gosh, if I didn't know you got it, I would have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah. And it's like a tragedy, and it's a small pebble. Like once you frame that for people, literally, and I'm an operations mindset, but that just feels so tragic and wasteful for me, particularly when the prescription to overcome it is so simple.
And you've said there's two ways that we can communicate our logic, and one being more useful than the other when it comes to making a point. Can you walk us through those two ways?
Sure. And I want to be super clear. This only applies if you have a logic problem. If you don't have a logic problem, ignore everything I'm about to say. But if people doubt your logic, your two ways of communicating are this beautiful storytelling, where you take us on a journey and it's got twists and turns and you ultimately get to the point. And it's really wonderful. But if in the hands of a logic wobbler, you could lose us at every twist. You may even lose yourself at some of the turns. And so by the time you ultimately make your point, you may no longer have any witnesses for it. And that's super sad. So if you're a logic wobbler, I would say storytelling is out, and instead start with the point, with at least the scaffolding of your point, and then provide the supporting evidence. Because if you lose any of us along the way, you've already made your point. Whereas the other, you would have said your point in the room and there are other people in the room, but nobody digested it. So move from storytelling, which we call an upside down triangle, a triangle with the point at the bottom, to a right side up triangle. Start with the point, then give the supporting evidence. But that's only for logic wobblers. If you get your logic, and the beautiful people in the advertising agency that you recently spoke to, the person who did the t-shirt contest, I'm sure they're brilliant storytellers. I don't want them to stop, of course, but only logic must underlie brilliant storytelling.
We often talk about when it comes to building presentations, when it comes to building pitches, you start with your point, back it up. So we call it message, metaphor, meaning. Start with your point, come with a story that backs up the point, or a case study or an example that backs up the point, and then finish with literally the language, what this means for you is. Translate that point to their world. And by following that structure, as you said, if they're going to have heard the point up front. And if you get interrupted, something happens and you don't get to finish, which happens so frequently, you've already made your point.
And it's so beautiful. And then, if you think about, but where are the times you've been captivated? And so I like to watch a lot of stand-up comedy, and I don't know the point. I am so enjoying the journey. So I don't want to remove that from the world. I just want to put that forward as a super high varsity sport.
And it also ties back into what you're saying about the self-awareness of knowing where you wobble in that trust triangle. Do you wobble on logic, yes, on communication of logic? Do you wobble on authenticity, which we're going to talk about now? Yeah. Or do you wobble on empathy, that deep devotion part, that ability to be wholly present, pretend you're blind, use your voice? So let's go to the authenticity wobble. And this is one that, again, I hear so many times. I want to feel like it's me. This is the language that I hear. I want to feel like it's me. I want to share, but I don't know how much to share. I don't want to share too much. I don't want it to be inappropriate. I don't want to, feel like I've just shared something that I then have to pull back because I really wished I hadn't shared that.
Yeah. And so I think, and so it's useful to think, if you're on the, anytime you're thinking, I think this would be inappropriate, I'm going to go ahead and say, follow your instincts. If you're even hesitating,
if it's even a question,
just go ahead. If it's a question in your mind, just go ahead and not say it. And then, so that's on the, how much is too much. And there, I don't want anyone to be inauthentic, but I do believe in trimming. The other end, which is the part that I find quite, it's depriving for individuals and for groups, is that I don't feel comfortable bringing my full self. I'm going to keep a lot of me at home because I just don't know if I feel safe enough here to bring it. That's the part where we want to think about, well, how can I be more authentic? And the reason that authenticity is harder than empathy and logic is that I can work on my empathy and I can work on my logic. But my feeling safe enough to be authentic in this room, I have to co-produce it with the other people in this room. So this is the one I can't do myself. Whether or not the rest of the room is creating the conditions for me to feel safe, I contribute to it, but so do others. So authenticity is the one reason it's harder to solve, is that you can rarely do it all on your own, and you have to do it with others. And that just means that, and so what I try to do is coach people, when you're feeling secure, your job is to just put your antenna out for others that look like they aren't, and your job is to be helpful to them. So when you have put the oxygen mask sufficiently on yourself, so you're oxygenated, your job is to look out for others. But if you're like not feeling secure, other people are certainly not your obligation. And so how this plays out in practice is I used to hear a lot that, or observe a lot that gender is a women's problem, or race is a Black person's problem, or a person of color's problem. And nothing could be further from the truth. Like, we all benefit when diversity is brought in. Like, we all benefit from the creativity and the innovation and the increased rigor. So we shouldn't disproportionately burden the diverse with the hardship of diversity, since we all benefit. Indeed, it should be the opposite. So I'm watching the Black Lives Matter movement, and one of the things that I'm most encouraged by is that we are no longer solely asking Black people to educate us about race. Like, we're starting to realize that's super inappropriate. Like we're no longer asking Black people to be the only people that solve racial injustice, because they're not the only people involved. In fact, why would we ask the people that are like super turmoiled by it to be the one? It's the rest of our job to really make a difference. So I am working harder on racial injustice, certainly, than I am on queer rights. I almost feel like it's not my obligation for queer rights. That's the obligation of others. But racial injustice, man, do I feel that that's my obligation.
You had said once that you're just tying back into authenticity and putting on your oxygen mask, that you had been tempted at every step of your career, personally and by coaching, to mute who you are when you're around others. And it kind of got me thinking about, again, radical responsibility for the people who are around you and being able to be there for the people who are around you. What would you say now if you were the coach that you actually needed in those moments?
Oh, I would have celebrated what was unique about me, as opposed to giving the really well-intentioned but super unhelpful, here's how to fit in.
Yeah, but that's what tends to happen, right?
Yeah, but it's if I could just, one cautionary tale, words I'd like to remove. Please never tell anyone how to fit in, ever again.
As a leader, as a parent, as a friend.
All of it. Instead, celebrate the uniqueness of each person.
Well, on that note, I'm gonna send you back out into the world to do the incredible work that you do, and in the way that you do it. And I want to say thank you for, the body of work that you bring is just amazing. And I know you continue to bring it every day, just like wearing the Uber t-shirt. You continue to bring it every day.
Well, and I'm, thank you so much for the opportunity to share these ideas. And, what I love most about interviews is if I'm crouched down, but I just get to be in the moment and respond to questions. And I felt like I was in really good hands, and I just got to respond to the questions, and I found it super, I got to learn from the way in which you framed the questions. So thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode and have seized hold of at least one tool, idea, or mindset that will help you start raising your own level of influence. Now, for those of you who want to take the next step in your journey, or would just love a roadmap to becoming the most influential voice, idea, or brand in your space, then I have good news. You can now download the latest updated version of my ebook, The Influencer Code, from my website, juliemasters.com. Also, there's a link in the show notes. Just pop in your email address, and I promise I will not spam you, but it is jam-packed full of ideas, tools, and case studies that I have come across in my now 20 plus years of doing this work. Not to mention the 7 areas and 7 core questions that I have found to be hands down the most valuable when it comes to immediately lifting your ability to make an impact. Download it, keep it, share it, juice it for all it is worth. I hope it makes a massive difference in both your career and your business. thank you always to my co-founder and the main brain behind this podcast, Lauren Kelly. You kick my butt in all the right ways. Thank you for making it happen. And if you did enjoy the show, then we would love you to share this podcast and leave us a review on iTunes, Google, Stitcher, whatever your platform of choice happens to be. And don't forget to subscribe to